My name is Laurel Bristow, and 3 days after I gave birth to my daughter, my mother stood in my sister's engagement dinner and called me a jealous little martyr who turned motherhood into a weapon. She said it while my hospital bracelet was still on my wrist, while Sela was sleeping in a carrier beside my chair, and while every person at that table pretended not to hear the cruelty under her smile. Darlene thought I had come there to beg for help, to apologize, to switch the payments back on like a good daughter with no memory. I did not correct her. I only looked at the blank television behind Kinsley's champagne tower, knowing the folder in my diaper bag and the voicemail on my phone were minutes away from ruining the prettiest night my mother had ever stolen from me. Welcome back to Pure Drama Stories, where family betrayal does not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it comes dressed for a celebration, smiles for the room, and forgets that quiet people keep receipts. But before that screen lit up, before my sister's fiancé stopped laughing, and before my mother realized her perfect family story had already cracked open, let me take you back to the night she refused to come for my newborn. I had been home from the hospital for less than 24 hours when the bleeding started again. Not the normal kind they warn you about in soft voices before discharge. Not the kind you handle with pads and breathing and a brave little lie that says every new mother feels like this. This was different. This was sudden, warm, frightening, and fast enough that even my stubbornness stepped aside. I was sitting on the edge of the bed at 10:17 p.m., holding Sela against my chest, when the room tilted. 1 second, I was watching her mouth move in sleep. The next, I was gripping the nightstand with my left hand and trying not to drop my baby. Nolan was in Minneapolis, stuck after a canceled flight from a conference he had tried to leave early. He had been calling every airline, every rental counter, every service that promised miracles if you paid enough money. I could hear the helpless fury in his voice when I told him something was wrong. "Call your mother," he said, and I knew he hated saying it. He knew my mother, but he also knew geography. Darlene lived 16 minutes away. She had a car. She had a key to our house. She had spent that morning sending photos of herself holding Sela and writing captions about being blessed beyond words. So I called her, because pain makes even smart women reach for old doors. She answered on the 4th ring over the sound of music and clinking glasses. "Laurel, this really isn't a good time," she said, before I had spoken a full sentence. I told her I needed to go to the emergency room. I told her I needed someone to sit with Sela until Nolan could get home or until I could arrange help. I said the word bleeding. And there was a pause. Not fear, not panic, just irritation searching for a polite costume. Then my mother lowered her voice and said, "Kinsley's engagement dinner is tonight. You knew that. Your sister finally has one beautiful moment, and you pick now." I remember looking down at my daughter, at the tiny blue vein in her eyelid, at the way her whole body trusted the arms holding her. That was the second my life divided itself into before and after. Before, I would have explained. After, I understood that a woman who hears her daughter say, "emergency," and answers with "engagement dinner," has already told you everything. I said, "I need help with the baby for one night." Darlene sighed. Long, heavy, public. I could almost see her pressing one hand to her pearls so the table would know I was exhausting her again. "You chose to have a child, Laurel," she said. "Do not punish the whole family because motherhood is harder than you imagined." I did not scream. I did not collapse into the sound she deserved. I hung up because rage was not useful and my daughter was. With one hand, I called the postpartum nurse line. With the other, I opened the emergency contact list Nolan and I had built during pregnancy, the one my mother had mocked as paranoid. 15 minutes later, a licensed night nurse named Jezebel arrived in a raincoat, hair wet, face calm, hands washed before she touched anything. She took one look at me and said, "Go now." Then she looked at Selah with a softness that made something in my throat break open. My mother could not drive 16 minutes. A stranger crossed town in a storm. At the hospital, they gave me fluids, medication, and that bright, terrible attention medical people use when the situation is no longer small. Nolan stayed on video call from an airport chair, his face gray under the fluorescent lights, telling me he was coming. I told him Selah was safe. I told him Jessa was with her. I told him the doctors were handling me. Then, when the nurse stepped out and the room grew quiet except for the soft beat beside my bed, I opened my banking app. For 9 years, I had sent money to my parents. I had called it help because help sounds noble. It started with my father Milton's blood pressure medication, then a roof leak, then property taxes, then just a little bridge until things settle. Things never settled. The amount grew the way mold grows behind a wall, quietly, until one day it is structural. $2,000 for household expenses, $1,500 for Dad's medical fund, $800 for repairs, $700 under a label my mother had asked me to name family support because she said labels looked ugly if anyone saw them, $5,000 a month, every month, for almost a decade. I had never added it up because some totals are not numbers at first. They are accusations. They are mirrors. They are the cost of being loved only when you are useful. But lying there 3 days postpartum, with an IV in my arm and my mother's sentence still warm in my ear, I made myself look. The app did not hesitate. It did not soften the truth for me. It did not say, "But she is your mother." It showed me the history with clean little lines and dates and amounts. $540,000. I stared at that number until it stopped looking like money and started looking like years. Vacations Nolan and I never took. A bigger emergency fund we never built. A better crib I talked myself out of because practical women do not need beautiful things. I thought I had been keeping my father safe. I thought I had been protecting the roof over their heads. I thought I was buying peace, but peace that requires one person to bleed quietly is not peace. It is a payment plan. I canceled the transfers one by one. Household, medical, repairs, family support. 4 confirmations. 4 small digital locks clicking shut. I expected to feel cruel. Instead, I felt a calm so pure it almost frightened me. Then my phone buzzed with a voicemail transcription from my mother, probably left by accident after I had hung up. At first, it was just background noise, dinner music, someone laughing. Then Darlene's voice came through, bright and annoyed. "Laurel is doing her usual performance. 3 days as a mother, and she already wants applause for surviving it. Kinsley never did this to me, and she is not even the one with a baby. There are moments that do not make you cry because they go deeper than tears." I saved the voicemail. I sent it to Nolan. Then I forwarded it to myself because I work in risk management and I do not trust single copies of important evidence. My mother had given me her cruelty in her own voice. All I had to do was keep breathing long enough to use it. Nolan arrived at dawn with no luggage and a face that looked 10 years older. He kissed my forehead, then my hand, then sat beside me in a silence full of murder he was too decent to commit. When I played him the voicemail, he closed his eyes. "Laurel," he said. And my name in his mouth sounded like an apology for every time he had watched me send money and chosen not to push too hard. I told him it was not his fault. It was not even mine in the simple way people like to explain these things. I had not been stupid. I had been trained. There is a difference, and every dependable daughter knows it. By noon, Darlene had discovered the transfers were gone. My phone lit up like a house on fire. First came the soft messages. "Honey, are you feeling better? Your father is worried." Then the sharper ones. "Did something happen with the bank?" Then the real ones. "Laurel, this is not the week for one of your moods." By 2 o'clock, Aunt Tilda had joined. Tilda Ransom was my mother's favorite witness, a woman who could smell family drama from 3 counties away and always arrived carrying judgment like a covered dish. Her text said, "Your mother is heartbroken. Cutting off your sick father after childbirth is unstable behavior. I hope Nolan is watching you." I read it twice, not because it hurt twice, but because the second reading showed me the shape of the room my mother was building. She was not asking for money anymore. She was preparing a jury. So I did what I had never done before. I gave the jury evidence. Not all of it. Not yet. Just enough. I attached a screenshot of the canceled transfers showing 9 years of payments, with the total visible, and sent it to Tilda with one sentence. "Before you call me unstable, ask Darlene why a sick father needed $500,000 and still could not afford his own prescriptions." The typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. That silence was the first honest thing my family had given me in years. When I got home the next evening, Salah was sleeping in the bassinet Jessa had folded into our living room like she belonged there. Nolan had stocked the fridge, changed the sheets, washed every bottle, and moved through the house with that quiet male panic that becomes labor when love has nowhere else to go. I sat on the couch with my laptop open and began doing what I do for a living. I followed money. The first truth was small and mean. My father's real medical expenses had not come close to what my mother claimed. There were prescriptions, yes. Appointments, yes. Insurance gaps, yes. But across 9 years, the confirmed medical costs were just under $72,000. Not $540,000. The property taxes had been paid, but not by my mother's account. They had been paid from an old escrow account tied to my grandmother Eudora's estate, an account I did not even know still existed. The roof repairs? Fake invoice. The basement repair? Fake invoice. The urgent furnace replacement I had paid for during our first year of marriage? The serial number on the receipt belonged to a furnace installed in Kinsley's new townhouse. Once I saw that, the rest opened like a rotten floor. My money had paid the deposit on Kinsley's boutique. It had paid for custom engagement florals, a photographer from Nashville, a champagne wall, and a white dress Kinsley called pre-bridal, because apparently even weddings needed rehearsal costumes now. It had paid down my mother's credit cards every March and September. It had paid for a country club membership under my father's name, though Milton had not played golf since 2018. It had paid for a life where Darlene could tell everyone she and Milton were comfortable but careful, while her oldest daughter quietly became the careful part. The most insulting line was not even the largest. It was a $2,000 transfer labeled "Sell a Gift." I clicked the attached note with my hands perfectly still. It had funded the engraved champagne flutes for Kinsley and Beckett's engagement dinner. My newborn's name had been used as camouflage for glassware. I printed everything, not hundreds of pages. People drown in too much evidence. I made a clean summary, 1 page, plain headings, exact totals, no adjectives. Then I placed the fake invoices behind it, then the voicemail transcript, then the bank records. Nolan watched me slide each page into a folder and said, "Are you sure you want to go to that dinner?" I looked at Sella's little fist curled under her chin. My body still hurt. My milk had come in painfully. I had stitches and bruises and a heart that felt like it had been handled by careless people. But I had never been more sure of anything. Darlene invited us herself, not with apology, with strategy. "Come to Kinsley's formal engagement dinner on Friday," she said in a voice sweet enough to rot teeth. "People are asking questions, and I think it would be good for everyone to see that you're fine." There it was. Not that I was safe, not that Selah was loved, that I was fine. Fine daughters do not embarrass families. Fine daughters keep paying. Fine daughters smile in pictures and swallow the truth before it stains the tablecloth. I said, "We'll be there." Then I made one more call to a man named Otis Bramwell. He had been my grandmother Eudora's bookkeeper for 31 years, a thin old man with careful eyes who still sent Christmas cards written in blue ink. I did not know why I called him except that my grandmother had once told me, "If numbers start acting strange, find Otis." He answered after 2 rings. I told him my mother had been using family bills to pull money from me. He did not sound surprised. That hurt more than shock would have. "Laurel," he said, "your grandmother saw more than you think." That was how I learned about the second folder. Eudora had not trusted Darlene. Not at the end. Maybe not for years. She had seen the way my mother talked about me, useful when needed, difficult when tired, dramatic when hurt. She had seen Kinsley praised for wanting things, and me praised for providing them. Before she died, Eudora had moved the old family property, the escrow account, and a small investment fund into a trust. Not to Darlene, not to Kinsley. To me, with Selah named as the future beneficiary after my death. Otis had the records. Attorney Marceline Pike had the legal originals. My mother knew about the trust, but not the beneficiary. She believed delay meant victory. She believed if she could keep me guilty long enough, I would never ask. The engagement dinner was held in my parents' house, though it looked nothing like the house I remembered. White flowers climbed the staircase. Gold candles burned on every surface. A television had been set behind the champagne tower to play Kinsley and Beckett's engagement slideshow, all soft focus kisses and ring shots and laughter designed to look effortless. My father sat near the fireplace, small inside his dress shirt, watching the room as if it belonged to weather. Kinsley floated from guest to guest in a cream satin dress, her left hand lifted just enough for the ring to keep catching light. My mother stood in the center of it all, smiling like a woman who had mistaken decoration for innocence. I walked in wearing a loose black dress because my body could not handle anything tighter. My hospital bracelet was still on my wrist. Selah slept against Nolan's chest in a soft wrap, her head no bigger than his palm. The room glanced at me, then away, the way people look at an injury they have been told is mostly attitude. Aunt Tilda was there. So were cousins, neighbors, Beckett's parents, and 2 women from my mother's church who had never missed a chance to witness someone else's shame. Darlene kissed the air beside my cheek. "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable," she whispered. I smiled. Not happily, accurately. Dinner began with toasts. Beckett said Kinsley had taught him what joy looked like. Kinsley cried delicately. My father stared at his plate. Then my mother rose with her glass, and I knew from the way her shoulders settled that the performance was beginning. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about family, sacrifice, grace. Then she turned toward me with her eyes already wet. "And of course," she said, "this week has been complicated because Laurel has been struggling emotionally after the baby. We love her. We forgive her. but I will not let anyone turn Kinsley's happiness into another one of Laurel's emergencies. The table went still in that cowardly way rooms go still when everyone knows cruelty has entered and nobody wants to greet it first. Darlene kept going. She could not help herself. Pride is a car with bad brakes. Some women become mothers and grow softer. Others become jealous. I only pray Laurel remembers that family is not a bank she can close whenever she wants attention. There it was. The sentence. The perfect opening. I did not stand. I did not lift my voice. I reached into the diaper bag, took out the folder, and set it beside my plate. "You're right about one thing," I said. "Family is not a bank." My mother's smile flickered. Kinsley frowned. Beckett looked between us, confused, still wearing the expression of a man who thought family drama was a temporary inconvenience before dessert. I opened the folder and slid the one-page summary into the center of the table. For 9 years, I sent this family $5,000 a month. The total is $540,000. I was told it went to Dad's medicine, property taxes, and house repairs. Aunt Tilda leaned forward before she could stop herself. I continued. Confirmed medical costs were $72,000. Property taxes came from Grandma Eudora's escrow. Several repair invoices were false. The furnace I paid for was installed in Kinsley's townhouse. The boutique deposit, the engagement photographer, the champagne wall, and tonight's flowers all trace back to money I was told my father needed to stay alive. Kinsley's face emptied. "That's not true," Darlene snapped, too quickly. I looked at Nolan. He picked up the small remote from the side table. My mother had left the slideshow ready because women like her always prepare the stage and never imagine someone else might use it. The television blinked on. Not with Kinsley's ring photo, with the voicemail transcript, white words on black, my mother's own sentence waiting for the room. Nolan pressed play. Darlene's voice filled the dining room, cheerful and cruel. "Laurel is doing her usual performance. 3 days as a mother and she already wants applause for surviving it. Kinsley never did this to me, and she is not even the one with a baby." No one moved. Even Selah stayed asleep, as if the truth was less disturbing than the lie had been. My mother's mouth opened, but the first sound that came out was not a word. It was a small, stunned breath. Kinsley whispered, "Mom." Not angry yet, just frightened. The kind of frightened that comes when a person realizes the floor under her has always belonged to somebody else. Then the doorbell rang. That was not timing. That was Otis Bramwell, who had lived his whole life believing punctuality was a moral category. Nolan opened the door, and Otis stepped in wearing a charcoal coat and carrying a leather document case older than I was. Behind him came Marceline Pike, the trust attorney, silver-haired, narrow-eyed, calm in the way only expensive lawyers and old nurses ever are. My mother went pale so fast it looked medical. Otis did not greet the room. He walked to the table, set the leather case beside my folder, and looked at Darlene with the tired disappointment of a man who had balanced too many books for people who thought arithmetic was optional. "Eudora knew," he said. 2 words. That was all it took to change the temperature of the house. Marceline opened the case and removed a copy of the trust. She did not dramatize it. She did not need to. Eudora Vaynor placed the family property, the escrow holdings, and the remaining investment accounts into a protected trust 18 months before her death. Laurel Bristow is the trustee. Her daughter, Selah, is the named future beneficiary. Darlene Vaynor has no authority to sell, borrow against, redirect, or manage those assets. My mother gripped the back of her chair. "That house is mine. No, Otis said softly. You lived in it. That is not the same thing. Kinsley began crying then, real crying, ugly and shocked, not the pretty engagement tears from 10 minutes earlier. Beckett slowly removed his arm from the back of her chair. His mother stared at the champagne tower as if it had personally offended her. My father finally lifted his head. For one brief, trembling second, I thought Milton might stand for me. He looked at me, then at Sella, then at Darlene. I didn't know it was that much, he whispered. It was not enough. It was almost something, but almost is the language of weak people who want credit for intentions they never turned into action. I gave him a small nod anyway, because I did believe him. He had not known the full amount. He had simply chosen not to know it, which is cheaper and nearly as cruel. Darlene turned on me then, all pearls and panic. You planned this. You came here to humiliate your own mother. I looked at the flowers, at the screen, at the champagne, at the room she had filled so my surrender would have witnesses. No, I said. You planned the humiliation. I brought the correction. That line did what shouting never could. It ended the conversation. Marceline explained the next steps while my mother sat down slowly, as if her bones had been unstrung. The trust would remain intact. The house would remain occupied by Milton and Darlene under strict lifetime residency terms, because Eudora had been stern, not vicious. No new loans, no asset transfers, no unauthorized withdrawals. Every future expense would require review. My payments were finished permanently. Any attempt to harass me for money would be documented through counsel. Aunt Tilda, who had called me unstable 2 days earlier, would not look up from the paper. I placed a copy of the summary in front of her. Since you were worried about my father, I said, I thought you should have the exact numbers. She nodded once, small and ashamed. That was all the apology I expected from her, and honestly more than I had budgeted for. Kinsley pushed her chair back. Did you pay for my boutique? She asked me, voice thin. I wanted to hate her in that moment. It would have been cleaner. But Kinsley looked young suddenly, not innocent, but unassembled. A woman raised inside a lie does not become honest the second the walls come down. She just stands there blinking in the dust. I paid for the first year, I said, and the townhouse furnace, and part of tonight. She covered her mouth. Beckett stood, not dramatically, just enough to make it clear that some private future had already started revising itself. My mother began to cry again, but now nobody moved toward her. That is the moment every family tyrant fears, not exposure, not anger. The moment the room finally lets them feel their own weather. I gathered the papers. Nolan adjusted Sella against his chest. She stirred, opened one dark newborn eye, and closed it again, unimpressed by the collapse of a dynasty built on invoices. I touched her tiny foot through the wrap and felt the last hook in me loosen. I had not come there to be chosen. I had come to stop being spent. At the door, my mother said my name. Not Laurel. Honey. The old hook. The oldest one. I turned. We can talk tomorrow, she said, voice broken in exactly the shape she knew worked on me. You don't want your daughter growing up without family. I looked at Sella, then back at the woman who had heard me bleeding 3 nights earlier and protected a dinner reservation. You're right, I said. That's why I'm leaving. No one followed us outside. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled washed clean, like the world had done one decent thing while we were inside. Nolan buckled Sella into the car seat. I stood under the porch light for a moment and removed the hospital bracelet from my wrist. I did not throw it away. I tied it around the handle of Sella's diaper bag, not as pain, as proof. One day, when the story was old enough to be told without shaking, I would remember exactly what it had cost to become free. Here is how it settled. The trust held. Darlene called 2 lawyers, then stopped mentioning court. Milton remained in the house, and I made sure his real prescriptions were paid directly through the trust, not because he deserved my management, but because I refused to become cruel just to prove I was finished being used. Darlene lost access to every account she had treated like oxygen. The country club membership vanished. The credit cards went quiet. The boutique had to stand on its own legs, which meant Kinsley had to learn what rent felt like when no invisible sister softened the floor. 3 months later, Kinsley mailed me a check for $400. No letter, just the check. It was not enough to fix anything, but it was the first honest money she had ever sent me, so I cashed it and put it into Selah's savings account. Beckett delayed the wedding, then he canceled it. I did not celebrate that. Some consequences are too obvious to applaud. Tilda told the family the truth because gossip, once redirected, can become a crude form of justice. People stopped asking why I had cut my parents off. They started asking Darlene where the money went. She hated that question, which is how I knew it was the right one. Otis comes by once a month now with pastries and unnecessary paperwork. Marceline still sends formal updates in envelopes thick enough to make my mother nervous. Jessa, the night nurse, stayed with us for 2 weeks, and Selah knows her now as the woman who arrived when Blood Family did not. Nolan never again asked me to soften a boundary for peace. He saw what that peace had cost. And me? I am still calm. That part did not change. I still pay bills on time. I still make spreadsheets when life gets messy. I still believe in caring for people. But I no longer confuse being needed with being loved. I no longer let family turn my stability into a shared account with no withdrawal limit. My daughter was 3 days old when my mother taught me the clearest lesson of my life. Some people do not abandon you when you are weak. They abandon you when you finally need them to be strong. That night, I stopped begging for a place in the family story. I opened the books, closed the account, and wrote my own ending. Commentary time. Before we move on from Laurel's story, I want you to sit for a second with the most uncomfortable part of it. Her mother did not fail her because she was confused, overwhelmed, or too far away. She failed her with full awareness. She heard the word bleeding. She knew there was a newborn in the house. She knew her daughter had given birth only 3 days earlier, when the body is still torn between pain, shock, exhaustion, and survival. And even then, Darlene measured Laurel's emergency against Kinsley's engagement dinner and decided the dinner mattered more. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a hierarchy. That is a mother showing, in real time, which daughter gets protected and which daughter gets used. What makes this betrayal so brutal is not just that Darlene refused to help. It is the way she framed Laurel's need as manipulation. Think about that for a moment. Laurel did not ask for jewelry, attention, money, applause, or drama. She asked for one night of help with a newborn while her body was in danger. Yet Darlene turned that into an accusation. You turned motherhood into a weapon. That kind of sentence does not come from simple irritation. It comes from years of resentment. It comes from a parent who has become so comfortable benefiting from a daughter's strength that the daughter's weakness feels like disobedience. And that is where this story becomes bigger than one family. How many people watching this have been assigned the role of the strong one before they were ever given the choice? The one who does not need rest. The one who always figures it out. The one who can be disappointed, delayed, ignored, and still expected to show up with money, grace, and a polite smile. Families love to praise that person. They call them mature, reliable, independent, a blessing. But sometimes those compliments are not love. Sometimes they are a velvet rope around a prison cell. Laurel's calm is one of the most powerful things in this story because it is not weakness. It is not emotional numbness. It is discipline under pressure. There is something almost frightening about a woman who stops explaining herself and starts collecting evidence. Darlene wanted a crying daughter because crying can be dismissed. She wanted a loud daughter because volume can be labeled instability. She wanted a shaking, apologetic daughter who would be easy to pull back into the old system. What she got instead was a woman with a hospital bracelet on her wrist, a newborn in the room, and the patience to let documents speak where screaming would have failed. The money trail matters because money, in stories like this, is never just money. It is control, image, guilt, silence, and permission. For 9 years, Laurel sent $5,000 a month under the belief that she was helping her father survive, keeping the house stable, and protecting the family from collapse. But the truth was uglier. Her money did not simply disappear. It was redirected into a lifestyle that allowed everyone else to preserve their illusions. Kinsley got the boutique. Darlene got the prestige. Milton got the comfort of not asking questions. The extended family got a clean little myth about hardworking parents and a difficult older daughter. Laurel paid for the myth, then got punished when she finally read the invoice. That fake invoice detail is especially sharp because it shows how betrayal often hides inside ordinary paperwork. Nobody walks into a room wearing a sign that says, "I am exploiting you." They use softer labels, medical fund, house repairs, family support, temporary help, just until things settle down. And because Laurel was decent, she believed the language. That is what decent people do. They assume the explanation is true because they would never invent something so cruel themselves. But decency without verification becomes a hunting ground for people who know exactly how to sound wounded while taking what they want. I also want to talk about Kinsley because it would be easy to make her the whole villain, but the story is more complicated than that. Kinsley benefited from the lie, absolutely. She floated through her life on money she never earned and never questioned. She enjoyed the boutique, the engagement party, the polished image, the soft landing. But Darlene created the ecosystem that allowed Kinsley to stay innocent in her own mind. That does not erase Kinsley's responsibility, but it does explain the shock when the truth lands. When Laurel tells her, "I paid for the first year," Kinsley is not just hearing a financial fact. She is hearing that her adulthood was built on her sister's sacrifice. So here is a question worth asking. At what point does not knowing become its own kind of guilt? If someone benefits from a system for years and never once asks who is carrying the weight, are they innocent or are they simply comfortable? Kinsley did not forge the invoices. She did not leave the voicemail. She did not refuse to come for the newborn, but she lived inside the advantage. She accepted the ease. She let Laurel be the invisible floor under her feet. That is not the same as masterminding the cruelty, but it is not harmless either. Darlene's public performance at the engagement dinner is painfully familiar. The flowers, the champagne tower, the emotional toast, the carefully chosen witnesses, the language about family and forgiveness. She was not trying to heal anything. She was staging a surrender. She wanted Laurel surrounded, softened, and shamed until she turned the money back on. That is why public humiliation is such a favorite tool for manipulative people. In private, you might stand your ground. In a room full of relatives, church friends, in-laws, and future family, they expect you to protect the image even while they damage you. But Laurel understands the stage better than Darlene realizes. She does not reject the audience. She uses it. That is one of the cleanest reversals in the entire story. Darlene gathers witnesses to make Laurel look unstable, and Laurel gives those witnesses the numbers. Darlene brings emotion, Laurel brings records. Darlene brings a speech, Laurel brings a spreadsheet. Darlene brings shame, Laurel brings context. And once context enters a room, manipulation starts losing oxygen. The same people who might have nodded through Darlene's tears suddenly have to stare at totals, invoices, trust documents, and a voicemail no one can explain away. The voicemail is devastating because it removes the last hiding place. People can argue with memory. They can say you misunderstood, exaggerated, heard it wrong, took it personally. But a voice recording has a different kind of gravity. Darlene's cruelty becomes physical. It fills the dining room. Everyone hears the exact contempt Laurel had been forced to carry alone. And notice how Laurel does not need to embellish it. She does not add dramatic music. She does not shout, "See what she said?" She simply presses play. That restraint is what makes the moment so cold. The truth does not need decoration when it is already sharp enough. Then Otis arrives, and his role is important because every strong revenge story needs more than personal anger. It needs institutional weight, a folder, a trust, an attorney, a record that exists outside family gossip. Otis represents the part of truth that waited patiently until Laurel was ready to receive it. He also proves that Eudora was not fooled. That detail matters emotionally. Laurel spent years believing she was unseen, but someone had been watching the pattern. Someone had noticed the unfairness. Someone had prepared a safeguard. Not perfectly, not soon enough to spare Laurel all that pain, but enough to stop Darlene from owning the ending. Eudora's trust is not just a legal twist. It is a moral reversal. Darlene thought the house, the accounts, and the family image belonged to her because she had performed ownership long enough. But performance is not ownership. Possession is not entitlement. Standing in a house does not make it yours, especially when the woman who built the safety net chose the daughter who actually understood responsibility. That line from Otis, "You lived in it." That is not the same thing, cuts so deeply because it applies to more than property. Some people live inside other people's labor and mistake that for a right. Milton is maybe the saddest figure in the room, but sadness does not excuse him. His line, "I didn't know it was that much," carries the familiar weakness of someone who avoided the truth because avoidance benefited him. He may not have orchestrated the theft. He may not have enjoyed the lies the way Darlene did, but he lived under the roof. He saw the spending. He heard the requests. He watched his daughter carry load after load and chose the safety of silence. In families like this, the quiet parent often gets treated as less guilty because they are less cruel out loud. But silence can still be a signature at the bottom of the damage. And Laurel's response to him is mature in a way that hurts. She does not attack him. She does not beg him to finally become the father she needed. She simply recognizes him accurately. That is a different kind of grief. Sometimes the hardest goodbye is not to the parent who harmed you directly. It is to the parent who could have stopped it, knew enough to suspect it, and still stayed seated. Laurel lets Milton remain in the house through the trust because she refuses to become brutal, just because brutality was done to her. That choice does not make her soft. It makes her free. The hospital bracelet is one of the strongest symbols in the story because it is small, ugly, and honest. It is not glamorous revenge. It is not a trophy. It is not money. It is a strip of proof from the night her family revealed itself. When Laurel ties it to Selah's diaper bag, she is not worshiping the wound. She is naming it. She is saying, "This happened. I will not let anyone rewrite it into drama, hormones, misunderstanding, or postpartum instability." Sometimes healing begins when you stop letting other people rename your pain for their comfort. The ending works because Laurel does not burn the world down. She closes the account. That is the point. Revenge, in this kind of story, is not about becoming as vicious as the people who hurt you. It is about removing access. Darlene loses the money. Kinsley loses the illusion. Tilda loses the easy gossip. Milton loses the convenience of not knowing. Laurel keeps her home, her child, her marriage, her dignity, and her calm. That is a much more satisfying victory than a screaming match, because it lasts after the room goes quiet. I want to ask you something directly. Who in this story made you angriest? Was it Darlene, because she heard her daughter say she was bleeding and still protected the engagement dinner? Was it Kinsley, because she enjoyed the benefits without asking where they came from? Was it Milton, because he saw enough to be suspicious and still chose comfort? Or was it Aunt Tilda, because every manipulative family seems to have one person ready to carry the villain's version before checking a single fact? Drop your answer in the comments, because I think different people will react to this story based on the kind of betrayal they have survived. And here is another question. If Laurel had not exposed the money publicly, would anyone have believed her? That is the ugly part. Private truth is often not enough when the lie has been public for years. Darlene spent a decade building her reputation in front of other people, so Laurel had to correct the record in front of other people. Not because she wanted attention, but because the damage had an audience. If someone humiliates you publicly and steals your reputation privately, you are not wrong for wanting the truth to stand where the lie once stood. This story also reminds us that boundaries are not always emotional speeches. Sometimes a boundary is a canceled transfer. Sometimes it is a password change, a printed statement, a refusal to answer the 10th guilt-filled phone call. Sometimes it is saying, "No more," without performing pain for people who already proved they would use your pain against you. Laurel's boundary works because it is concrete. She does not announce a new era. She creates one. The money stops. The records come out. The trust locks. Access ends. And if you are watching this as someone who has been the Laurel in your family, I hope you hear the most important part. Your usefulness is not your identity. You can be generous without becoming a resource. You can love people without financing their lies. You can be strong without letting everyone else stay weak at your expense. The people who truly love you will not require you to collapse before they take your pain seriously. They will not call your emergency an inconvenience. They will not dress up exploitation as family loyalty. Laurel's final victory is not that Darlene was embarrassed. It is that Selah will grow up with a different inheritance. Not just money in a trust, but a mother who learned the difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. A mother who stopped the pattern before her daughter could inherit it. That is the real revenge. Not the ruined dinner, not the exposed voicemail, not the legal file on the table. The real revenge is a baby girl who will never be taught that love means bleeding quietly while everyone else celebrates. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments what moment hit hardest. The phone call, the voicemail, the money trail, the dinner exposure, or the trust reveal. And if you want more stories where quiet people stop apologizing and finally let the truth enter the room, make sure you subscribe to Revenge Stories before you leave.